Well, hi, everyone. Time for cracking passwords for fun and profit. My name is Chris Timmons. I'm a penetration tester and security specialist team lead at Ion United. Um, Second time presenting for B-Sides Vancouver, so let's hope it's a good one this time. So passwords, everyone has one. And people make passwords differently. You look at the complexity requirements and things. Some people think they know how to create a good password. Some people don't. We're actually going to take a look at the back end on it and see how some of that stuff works when we're actually trying to crack passwords. So if we're doing a pen test and we're getting passwords, how quickly and easily can we crack them, and some of the human nature around it. I mean, obviously, a lot of people understand why, but we're going to dive into that a little bit for those who don't. So who am I? As I mentioned, security specialist team lead at Ion. I've been doing this for about 27 years. I've been in the Department of National Defense. I've held senior roles at various companies. I've been working at Ion United as a pen tester for just over 3 years now. So we have done lots of things. And according to my loving wife, and I have to say loving wife, my workshop can act as a NASA disaster recovery location. It is got stuff all over the place, and it's used to help extract passwords. I do forensic hacking. I do password cracking, hardware hacking, a bit of wireless, did smartphones for a while, obviously doing a lot of forensics for things like incident response. And I used to play around with robots and stuff as part of an innovation team. So hacking a robot is fun. So why? Well, I like shiny things and I am a chronic procrastinator. If there is a reason not to do work, my boss is going to think that I do it. I'm also a huge fan of build once and use many. If you're going to do it once, great. If you know that you're going to have to do it twice, just automate it, because then you'll thank yourself the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time you've done it. And as I mentioned, I like cracking passwords. So this is my home rig right here. I've got 4 NVIDIA GTX 1080s in it, with terabytes and terabytes of space, because I like to collect things. I'm a data hoarder, so I've got password list. Anytime I find a dictionary on the internet, I grab it, I check the quality of it, breach compilation data. I've got it all, and just sit there and keep building up more and more and more. So I'm going to dive into a little bit on Hashcat, and I'm going to focus on Hashcat today just because nothing against John. It's just I wanted to use Hashcat for the presentation today. So one of the things with Hashcat is it's very versatile. It supports what are called a number of different attack modes: straight, combination, brute force, which technically is a mask attack, and then 2 different kinds of hybrid word list plus mask, so word list and mask, or mask and word list. And then another one that a lot of people don't know about, called an association attack. So we're actually going to go and walk through some of these. So some of the basics on this one. So dictionaries. Dictionaries are big giant word lists, and they're either 2 things. One, they're a compilation of exposed breached passwords, so things like RockU. WeakPass is a good one because they go and they get all the breach data and stuff that comes out, scrapes it, and basically puts all the passwords and stuff into a file. And it's a big file. The latest WeakPass 3 is just over 100 gigabytes in size, so that is a lot of passwords. And they do a pretty decent job of cleaning it up. CrackStation was one from a couple years ago. It's a decent size. But it's beyond just looking at passwords that are exposed, like summer 2022. Great, it's in a password file, but what about other things that don't have letters and numbers and special characters on it? And that's where dictionaries really come in. So use all the languages. Why? Because, well, you don't know what languages might be in use of the password that you're cracking. They could be using German or Russian characters or something with umlauts in them. And that's why I mentioned about UTF encoded dictionaries are the best to use, because they support it. Other word lists: sports, sport teams, music, names of songs, breeds of dogs. That's actually a pretty common one. Another one is passphrases. I've got some stuff in here I'll show you guys on how to get some good passphrases. And we're talking things like every verse of the Bible, or every lyric to every song ever made, or, those are phrases that people can use when they're creating a password. And of course, I mentioned data breaches. There's just a lot. So I don't rely necessarily on WeakPass and stuff like that to go get them for me. I've got a couple of terabytes of breach data that I go munging through whenever I need something. One of the things about is if you are ever pen testing or cracking passwords against a customer, one of the important things to do is make sure that you're using words and terminology and things that are relative to that company. The number of times we've gone in and we're doing password cracking for a customer, and they're using words that are posted on their website. They're using the name of the company. So Cool is a custom word list generator. It's just a little Ruby app. You tell it to go spider a website. It goes and searches through all the metadata, pulls out names of things and software and that was used to create the file. And then it compresses it all into a nice sorted list. And you can tell it to make it all lowercase, and you can mangle the data however you want afterwards. But it's extremely effective. First thing I run anytime I'm doing OSINT on a customer, just getting ready for password cracking, because the number of times that it's company name 12345 is the password, or the name of a software project or something that they're working on. And we'll actually get more into the name of the software project in just a little bit. Second part of Hashcat is rules. And the rules as part of the mask attack are just, these are just some examples of some of the good ones that Hashcat has in it, and a couple that aren't. And rules just basically take letters and characters within a password and flip it. So you can make lowercase to uppercase. So the toggles rules, for example, will capitalize 1 to 5 characters in the password concurrently. So a toggles to rule will just take 2 characters, so first character and last character, and then first character and third character, and it just keeps going through the iterations, trying variations on it. 99.99999% of the time, human nature, people will put a capital letter somewhere. Usually not more than a couple, though, and it's usually in the first spot. A second one is a combinator rule, where you can actually combine 2 words. So you take 2 dictionaries, or even the same dictionary, and you throw it together. Why? Well, because way back in the day, people were telling people make good passwords. And then so you would make a password, and your password would be the name of your dog. And then they realized, oh, well, you need to make a better password. It's got to meet Windows complexity requirements. So it has to be a longer word. Oh, okay, well, let's get the name of both of my dogs together. Combinator rule. And of course, you can't crack passwords without leet speak, because everybody makes a password. The dead rule, just one of the ones that I find is between that and best 64. They're a little older, but they get the job done. There's even a reduced version of the dead rule, which takes the 75,000 rules or something and dumps it down to like 1,500. So it's like really small, very efficient. Because what happens with a lot of rules, and I'll show you some statistics after, you hit kind of a point of, okay, we've gotten just about everything. But you're still processing things in the background, and it's not doing anything useful. The one rule to rule them all, as I mentioned, it's not a Lord of the Rings reference, but it does work. It's a large rule, but it tends to be highly effective. And really, it depends on what you're cracking at the time. I usually just put them all. You can load up all the rules at the same time, but it'll just take forever. Think of your dog. Nice one, Dana. The second thing is, so when you take a look at when you're creating rules and masks and stuff, you use character sets, and these character sets all break down into different ones. So the L is lowercase, and upper is uppercase, D is digit, S stands for special characters. A lot of people use the A, which is all 4 of them. You can also define custom character sets, so I could use like -1 and say I just want lower, upper, and digits and no special characters. And then I can use that in my mask, so I'm not having to type it all out, and I'll try those 3 different variations within the character set. Some of the lesser known ones, of course, hexadecimal and uppercase or lowercase. It's got a flag for both. So why do we use masks? Well, the masks are based on the whole strong password rules we've forced on users for years. And unfortunately, users are really bad at picking passwords. Usually it's a word and a number and a special character, and as I mentioned, it always starts with an uppercase letter. Knowing this, you can actually say, well, let's not test every password. We'll just test the key space that we want to, that we assume that the users are going to go, and take a look. So if you use a mask of upper, lower, 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 digit, 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 that equals spring 2022. Perfect. So, and because we don't have to go through all these special characters and uppercase characters and everything else, you're only checking 26 potential tries for each position instead of the 300 and some. So it makes it happen very, very fast. How do you generate masks? Well, you can do it manually. And there's a couple of different ways. There's two that I've got here in the presentation. The first is Mask Processor, which is built into Hashcat. And you can actually just basically generate a word list that has whatever you want. So in this case, I used Mask Processor, and I said, I want to make B-sides, and I want a file that has every possible combination or potential combination of this one. So I made it, and now I have a file that has B-sides 0000, and it'll go all the way to 99999. Obviously, you're now throwing a file at it, but if you're using a CPU-based attack or GPU, it sometimes comes in a little handier. But you can also then take this dictionary file and use it with other rules, like one rule or leet speak or something like that, and generate better candidates. Another thing that's really handy is called PAC, the Password Analysis and Cracking Toolkit. It basically, you feed it a password file, and it just goes through and generates everything. And I wish I had made this screenshot a little bigger, I'm sorry. But it tells you the character sets that you're using. If you look on here, it says we're using lower alpha num. So there's no special characters in 90% of the passwords in this. And then at the end, it generates masks. What you can do with PAC afterwards then is generate what's called a Hashcat mask. And it basically says, here's a list of all the different rules I want, or not rules, masks I want you to try. So I want to look at all the upper, lower, 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 digit, digit, digit kind of ones, and then I want a whole bunch and with a special character on the end and things like that. And it'll just run through. So that makes your password cracking much more efficient. And what are we cracking? Well, common hash types for using MD5, because anybody finding a backup file on the internet, that's where we find it. SHA-1, Microsoft Office files. NTLM, obviously the gold when you're doing pen testing, that's the one you want. NetNTLM v2, very common as well. And then there's 3 types of Kerberos. And a little pro tip on this one, if you use invoke Kerberos.PowerShell, you'll get these, but you won't be able to crack them because the formats are all wrong and the salting is all weird. But if you pull a Kerberos with Rubus instead, every time. So hashes, said here's all the different kinds. Well, where are you going to get them? As I mentioned, config backup files. This is actually one I pulled off during a pen test, got access to a DigiConnect router and pulled out the config file. And there's the password in MD5, which took me, and because it ended up, it was actually the default password still for the router. They hadn't changed it. So DigiConnect by default has root, and the password is DBPS. So that took me about half a second. I think it took me longer to type in the command than it did to actually crack the password. Kerberosing, of course, I mentioned before. The type 23 tends to be a little faster than the 17 and 18. So if you can, go for that. Henceforth, Rubia, so you have an option to downgrade. DC sync, of course, is always a fun one. One thing I've always had a problem with is when you get the log file from it, it's painful. So there's a little PowerShell script that you can use to just efficiently get all those files out. And of course, ntdds.dit extraction. So this is when you're actually either you've taken off a volume shadow copy service from a domain controller, or as I get into it, you're actually going to do it just for fun. But how do you know when your hashes, when you're taking a look at them? So for example, I know this is an MD5 just because of the config file, and I knew that that's what it would do. But how do you identify that? Well, the good thing is Hashcat actually has an auto detect mode. I rarely do it though, just because I have the example hashes bookmarked, and I literally just look for the right string. Hash ID is an older application. It's about 7 years old, but it still gets the job done as well. So you can just either have a file full of hashes or just put it in on the command line and hit go, and it'll tell you statistically which hash type it probably is. Cyphy and CyberChef, limited support. They're not going to tell you have an NTLM hash or things like that. But they are very good for a couple things. Cyphy is really good if you don't actually want to get Hashcat up and doing. Like if you're on a CTF or something and you've just got encrypted text, Cyphy will actually use an AI engine in the background and crack it for you. So for most of the time, if you have like a SHA-1 encrypted, or if it's using weird ciphers like Veneer or Caesar or things like that, it'll just crack it and spit out the plain text for you. So very handy to have. Nice little command line tool. And of course, CyberChef is in use all over the place as well. I do find Cyphy works a lot faster on some of the auto cracking stuff just because of the way the backend is, but CyberChef's just gold. Okay, so if we're going to show you guys any cracking stuff, first we need hashes. So what I've done is I've actually used the ntdds.dit customer files by Lauren Gallant with the deep. She actually does a domain password analysis toolkit, and so she had some sample data, and there was actually a Active Directory populated from RockU. So this actually works out really well for some of the demos. So straight out dictionary attack. So this is where we're going to take. I actually had demos, and I was actually going to do video demos for this entire thing. And up until 2 days ago, I realized I can't do videos. I apologize for the screenshots. There's a lot of them. We take a look at this. So what we've done, we've extracted all of our NTLM files into it. We've got our actual customer.hashes file. And what we've done is we've just run a straight out thing against RockU. Now, the flag -0 actually limits the password size that you can crack. So normally you can crack up to like 256 characters. When you use an optimized kernel, it squishes it down to 32. So you won't crack any passwords that are bigger than 32 when you're using that flag. In this case, we're using RockU, and 99% of the files in there are all like 8 to 12, 16 character kind of passwords. So it did make a difference on this one. But you can see here, so on this, we ran RockU just straight out. It took 12 seconds to run, and we got 99.98% of the digests. So we're missing like 20 passwords or 21 passwords out of the entire 87,000 that we were able to pull. So that's pretty fast. I'm going to take a look at start adding some rules. So Hashcat supports rules, and when you actually create a rules file, there's all these things. So like a T means for transpose letters and stuff like that. We're not going to get too much into that one because I don't think anybody on here is going to start creating their own rules from scratch. But so we'll take a look at this. We did this again. We ran RockU, and we threw on the one rule to rule them all. It took 48 seconds, so 4 times increase in time. We actually got 99.99. So now we're down to just 13 passwords that we didn't get. And just by doing that, whenever I ran these attacks, I was using a flag on Hashcat called disable pot file. And that just makes sure that it's always in memory. I'm not pulling it out of my pot file. This is raw results. And thanks, Dana, for posting all the links. It's great. Thank you. One small pro tip is if you have a small dictionary and a lot of rules. So if I had a cool word list, for example, that only has like 50, 60, 70, anything up to a couple of 100 words in it, throw -s on it, and you'll see a speed increase from like an hour to like seconds. But if you try and do it with a larger word list, it'll tell you, because you'll realize really fast, because your cracking goes from an hour to like 3. So now we mentioned passphrases. So passphrases are definitely something that's becoming a lot more common. People are saying, oh, passwords are bad. Stop using Spring 2022. Make a passphrase. Remember that you can use spaces and things like that. And so people do. And, I've already started cracking passwords because somebody's typing in quick brown fox jumped over a lazy dog. If it's a known phrase that is very popular, well, we've pulled it. Why? So on initstring created a passphrase word list. Last updated, I think, in October. So it keeps up being recent, but he cites all the sources he's pulling stuff. So he's pulling from like Wikipedia, like actually every word off Wikipedia, or quotes. famous quotes, Bible verses, everything. It's all in there. And there's two rules that are in there. The first rule deals with capitalizations and stuff like that. The second one deals with permutations. So things like adding spaces between words or putting underscores or dots or things that people might do when creating their secure passphrase. So it'll create 1,000 permutations of each phrase. So a quick brown dog jumped over would become like uppercase A, lowercase a, or a dot or an underscore, just and on and on and on. When we take a look at that, oops, hang on. There it is. Same thing, I mentioned this before. Watch out when using -o with passphrases because you're still limited to 32 characters, and passphrases can typically get longer than that. So, you know, sometimes maybe run it with a -o, see what you can get, and then run it again without the -o, just to get some of the low-hanging fruit. One of the things that we also have is what's called a combinator attack. So very similar, but this takes multiple dictionaries into an attack, where you can use the same file. It's whatever you want. You just put it in the mode, you take your hash files, and then you list out the files. So for example, if you think people are making passwords with breed of dogs and breed of cats, you could put in, here's your dog dictionary, here's your cat dictionary, and it'll just try every word. So it'll be like, you know, or apples, oranges, and then it'll try oranges, apples. So it tends to work pretty good with that. You can throw rules and stuff on those sometimes as well. If you can't use a rule, this is where you can generate back what I mentioned for the mask generator, because you can go create one of the files with all the digits on the end and then just use it on this one. And so we take a look at how far we did on this one. This one said it was going to take 2 hours, which, yeah, it's about the right thing. But it also creates a lot of potentials. That's why it takes 2 hours. However, you'll see that within 22 seconds, I still had those 99.98, just because we're using RockU. But if I had to do the full run, it would have taken 2 hours, which isn't too bad. But a lot of people ask me why. And the thing is, when you start dealing with combinations of words and you want to take this word and then this word. So imagine two lists of 1,000 words. 1,000 words isn't that much, but that creates 1,000,000 entries because you're looking at every word to every word in the list, and then the second word, every word in the list. You can do an attack called a combinator 3, and I don't really go into that one too much, but there's a utility called combinator 3 in the Hashcat utils, and you can actually tell it to do 3, which makes perfect sense. It takes forever. But when you're telling people to do passphrases and stuff like that, or you know, pick 3 words, 2 you like, 1 you don't, that's how you're going to have to run it. When you're running it in full memory, it's you know, like 1,000-word file is only tiny. It's a couple of kilobytes, not that big at all. If you were to try and write out all possible permutations of it, we're talking petabytes of size file. Like the files would just become astronomical. I did a combinator 3 attack, kind of a halfway one. So I took 1,000-word word file, ran it as an output to generate one larger file that had 1,000,000 words in it, and then just ran rules against it. So I did a combinator attack with a 2-word dictionary and then a third one. The challenge with that, of course, is it can't insert the word into the middle because you have to try all different 3 combinations. So you have to generate it twice and then do it again. But there are little tricks and hacks and things that you can do, but they tend to work for the most part. And I mentioned before, we did the brute force mask attack. We're doing it a little differently on this one. You'll see here we did lowercase across the board and then 2 digits on the end. It only took 1 second, and we got 3.64% of the hashes. So we got 3,000 passwords in just 1 sec, just from that. So if you know what you're looking for, it's pretty fast and easy to do a mask, and it's much more effective than brute forcing, because when you get into brute forcing, so if using every special character and every possible like letter and digit, you can see that exact same attack that took a second is now going to take me 2 days and 7 hours. So this, and take a look at these. This has been running for 50 seconds, and we've only gotten 2% of the digest, so only 1,900. So from a speed and capability perspective, this got much faster results with a lot less effort. And sometimes when you're pen testing, it's a roller coaster. It's, as Kurt mentioned yesterday in his talk, I love cracking passwords. So when I crack a password, I'm like, yay, do the little happy dance, and love to see it ring the shells and everything else. But when I'm sitting there trying to crack that, like when you're looking at a list of this and you've got, like 13 passwords left, you want to get that 100%. You're like, right? This is where you got to start pulling out some of the interesting things and taking a look. And that's where tools like Pack and everything else come in really handy, because it helps you try and find what's left over. Because some of the times, if you go back and take a look at one of the previous slides with Pack, you can see at the bottom, you can see the advanced masks, and you'll see like 1% of your passwords or 0.1% of the passwords are using this mask. So you might have another one, you might not, but those ones typically take several hours or days to run. And of course, I said when all else fails, sometimes you just have to brute force. Pro tip: a lot of customers are coming down and using 15-character passwords. This is why it's so important to use proper dictionary attacks and masks, because if you actually try and brute force anything over 15 characters, there's actually a math problem, and you'll actually get an integer overflow by doing it. So we had a question: can you change or modify your lists on the fly? Once you start cracking one, it loads it up in memory and it creates an index. And so if you modify that file while it's running, it's not going to pick it up. I do cheat once in a while by deleting the index or doing a pause on the thing. When you pause Hashcat, if you're in the middle of a run, it creates a restore session file. And it basically just tells you where in the index it was and all the settings that you had done. Well, if it can't find the index, it'll rebuild it, and sometimes it might start from scratch. But depending on how far in you were, like if you were a month into it, or, I've seen password crack over a month. If you're a month into it and you don't want to lose your spot, you're probably better off just checkpointing it, stopping it, taking a look at the results, and then trying something else, because you're probably not going to get it at that point. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but you're typically going to have those, like 30-day crack runs and stuff when you're doing a full brute force, not necessarily a dictionary attack. Like if you were to take the weak pass, the big 100 gig file that I did, and threw one rule against it, it's going to take a couple of days, just because that's how long it's going to take to run, 100,000 rules against 168 billion passwords. I don't brute force often, but if there's a chance. One of the better ones that we find are actually a hybrid attack, so very similar to the mask one. But what you're doing with this one is actually saying, I've got a known word. So things like company name, or name of a season, and just you can say, I want every word in this file. So as seasons, it's got spring, summer, fall, January, February, March, April, May, and throw all the digits on the end of it. Go. Done. Speed dependent on GPU or CPU or both. Typically, it's GPU dependent. When you're loading up very large dictionary files, it loads it into memory. So having more memory helps more than your CPU. You can include your CPU in password crackings, but what happens sometimes is then the operating system starts getting laggy and stuff from I/O, and so I typically don't, unless I'm really desperate for just that last little bit of performance. But for the most part, if you're gonna get a box, like if I were to say add another GPU or add another stick of RAM or add another CPU, I'd say GPU first, RAM second. After that, it's all about I/O for SSD and stuff for pulling these files off the list. So like for me, I've got all my stuff is using internal SATA, the 6 gigabit per second stuff, and anything I've got plugged in on USB is all using like USB 3.1. So it's, I've got 40 gigabytes per second of throughput. So it's usually pretty decent on that one. So I mentioned about the association attack before. And so this is really works well for very large salted hash lists. For example, bcrypt. It doesn't work so well for NTLM. And the reason is when you pull an Active Directory database, so ntdds.dit file, there's one salt for the entire thing. And the association attack needs the number of words in the word list to be perfectly in sync with the number of unique salts. If there's a one, like if you got 99 in one file and 100 in the other, it'll just stop. So on this one, what we did for this example is I bcrypted 1,000 names. I took, here's a word list. And then I made that word list, bcrypted them all, and then fed them that same name. I'll get to that question, Sav, in just a sec. So you have the salt, you have the hash. What happens is there's a hint, for lack of a better word. So the hint of the username might contain the same kind of thing. And in this case, you can see we ran a full 10,000 names in 1 second, 100% success rate. Because, well, obviously, I mean, kind of cheating a little bit because we had the known bcrypt hashes, but all we did was fed it the name of a file, and it went, okay, and went, and just to make sure it wasn't perfectly, like I sorted and shuffled them and all that stuff. And the reason this is an important one, and I wanted to bring it up, is because people tend to use names as part of the password. The number of times we've been on a pen test and the service account password is the name of the service account with like 1, 2, 3 exclamation on the end of it. Happens all the time. So so commonly what I do is when I'm cracking stuff, I'll pull all the usernames out. So when I extract like the NTDS file, for example, I'll pull all the usernames and service accounts and stuff out, and I'll use that in an association attack if I have to, or if I'm even throwing it back at it during the password cracks, because it works. Don't run into this one often just because of the kind of hashes that we're running into, but things like bcrypt, if you do have certain logins and stuff that have been exposed, it's going to find it really fast if that works. Oh, actually, before I go on to that one, so Slava, cloud GPU instance, ironically, I just finished setting up an AWS cloud cracking instance for a client. They wanted to get some password cracking. They're looking at enhancing some password policies and things like that. So they wanted to see how bad it was. So I worked with them to set up an AWS instance using like the AWS machine learning Ubuntu image, throw a bunch of stuff on it. It's actually for using a one large was all that we set up now. Because we're able to get so many password cracking efficiencies, we didn't have to go to like a 4 times large or anything. So in that has a Tesla V100, and I was getting 100 giga hashes a second out of that one. So my home rig was getting 160, and the single Tesla V100 was getting 100 giga hashes, so 100 billion per second. But using the combinations of like dictionary attacks and everything else that we did, I think I've got 26% success rate out of, and have to understand there's like, because they had full 12 character password history, there's something like 120,000 password entries that we're cracking, and I've already got 26% of them in like an hour. Like obviously going through the history 12 is always an easier password to crack than history 6, because as people create better password policies, you know, they always change. But it's interesting because when you start analyzing the password history, it gives you a chance to figure out what their new password might be. You'll see those things where people are just incrementing a number 1 or adding. Some people realize, oh, password 1, oh, I got to make it password 2. Well, let's make it a special character. So they just go shift, and the second one's the second key, and the third one's the third key, and yeah, and that's just going crazy on that one. Another interesting one is called Prince. So Prince processor purple rain attack. And basically what you do is you just feed things back in. So instead of taking like a combinator where you're taking 2 word lists and going, you're taking 1 word list, and then it's just kind of like chaining all of the words together and just throwing them in to find out. You can read more about the purple rain attack on that one. It's pretty effective. It basically, like, if it's probably one of the ones that I do about like number 5 or number 6, just because I want to have a good list on it. And one of the things I always do is do a poor person's Prince. I always take my pot file, spit out the password. So, you know, colons in your password will screw up workflows. Commas work great for data breaches. This command here will actually just, it flips the string around and then just grabs the first one. So you're not trying to grab the end one, which you might have this one goes right up from the first one. So if there's no colon in it, then it grabs the whole file. And then I just keep running it again with all the rules and everything else. Yeah, I've got a really good link that Sans actually had put out on setting up an AWS cracking instance. I'll try and find it. Actually, I'll put it in the chat here as well. We actually followed that one pretty closely. There was a few things that it didn't have, but for the most part, that was pretty informative as well. And then, so yeah, with the 4-person sprints, like I'll pull up my password file and I will just keep using it again and again and again and again. And you'll find as I go through different rules, so I'll use one rule and then I'll use like the dead rule or best 64, and then I'll go use like generated 2 or whatever. I'll just keep going back and forth, and you'll find as you get more passwords exposed, you get more success, and you start pulling out some really weird ones that way. I wanted to give a couple of neat little tricks and tips and stuff near the end of this one. I do a lot of CTFs just because why not? It's a lot of fun. If you're cracking a password with a dictionary, you need to create a rule, because when you try and crack, the password's always not just like the word rock, or like rock you were summer 2020. It's always wrapped in the flag. So curly bracket flag colon password. So you have to create a rule to actually wrap anything in it. So the problem is when you create a rule, it actually applies it in reverse order. So you would think, I need to write flag. Well, you actually have to go opposite way. So semicolon GAL kind of thing. So your rule looks like that. Flag.rule looks like this, boom. And then you can run it against it. So if you're doing a CTF and you need to crack a password, make sure your flag values are set to what they're looking for, and you'll have a lot more efficient on the password cracking on that one. Because typically on CTFs, they do 2 things. They always wrap in a flag, and they're always using RockU. So little things, people, for things like passwords for files, I mentioned Microsoft Office files, because you can actually pull out the encrypted file and brute force it that way. I get asked to do that all the time. Some people are losing things like Bitcoin wallets and passwords and stuff like that. How you get the hash is up to the mind of the reader. But basically, create a file with what you think your password is going to be, or what you think it might have been, or what you might have typed, or if caps lock accidentally on kind of thing, and then just start creating a whole bunch of permutations of it. So basically, read in the rules, put it out, and then it creates another file with here's all the permutations of it based on the rule, and then just start banging on it. Eventually, you'll get it. This works more often than I'd really care to expect. If you have no idea what the password is, then yeah, just kind of throw everything at it. In this case, it was a 7-zip file. You might get lucky. It doesn't work too well against things like things that you only have 5 chances before it deletes itself or something. So obviously, this is mostly taken off. Like for an Office file, you can run a command in John. Actually, there's Office to John, and it'll just pull out the encrypted hash, and then you just run it. I wanted to, obviously, I had to go through this a little fast, but practice. It's the best way. I can't always predict that I'm going to actually, get domain admin on a customer and stuff, and we have limited engagements. So when you're cracking those, you only have so much time. We've got a week to do the pen test and stuff. So there's you want, what can you get an hour? Go. CoreLogic runs a Crack Me If You Can contest every year at DEF CON. The nice thing is all of the previous contest files are always available. So everything going back to 2010 are there. So if you go and download the contest files, it's got, whether it's a list of different hash types that they want you to crack or anything else. Last year, they threw everybody for a loop and actually just provided an OVA file of a Windows domain controller and said, here, have fun. And then you have to go find everything, right? And so that's, like grepping through NTDS for, clear text passwords and descriptions and stuff like that. It was insane. But it was a lot of fun. And so you can go and download the contest files, go take a look at them, try cracking them yourself and see how good you do. And then go look at the explanations and all the write-ups and stuff and see how close you got. And then try it again. And then, practice, try and do it. AgileBits, the company who makes 1Password, actually puts out some password cracking challenges once in a while on their GitHub page. They're kind of fun. But if you're looking for ways of things to crack that are beyond, like the RockU file that PBAT put out was fantastic, great for demos and stuff like that. But when you get into some of the core logic ones, they start throwing weird loops at you where they're inserting 2 characters into a word, and you have to kind of like write a tool or something to figure out how to crack that. So it lets you play around with a lot of different kind of hash types and rules and processing. So going over some of the combinator attacks and the hybrid attacks in 6 and 7, those are ways of cracking a lot of those passwords, and that's why they're doing them. They're taking passphrases, they're mangling them, they're throwing leet speak at things and things like that. So a lot of fun to do and a lot of really interesting ways to practice. So, and with that, that was it. Perfect. We got time for Q&A. Have any Q&A?
That's awesome, Chris. Yeah, anyone who's got any questions, now's the time to ask. You can put it in the chat window or in the Q&A poll. I actually do see something that just went into the Q&A poll. How secure is bcrypt considered as a hashing mechanism?
It's actually pretty good. Bcrypt is really nice because it's very fast to encrypt and very hard to decrypt. AWS put out or Amazon put out a fantastic write-up on how they implemented bcrypt for AWS, and they did not pull any punches. They went through all the deep technical specs on it. And it is hard to brute force it. And that's where things like the association attack are so powerful, because it lets you get a potential up on that one because it's such a slow decryption. I saw another question up here too as well. It was...
Here's one here. Can you send the passwords to encrypted file, or do you perform them in a VeraCrypt container?
Actually, usually just directly in the file. So if I'm brute forcing like a 7-zip file or anything like that, like I'm extracting the password hash from the file, brute forcing it is just a text file or something on my rig, and then I'm going back to the 7-zip and typing it in manually.
Yeah.
There's another question here. It was, when creating these setups, what prevention methods do you take to ensure that these passwords are not exposed? So there's a lot. So for example, the AWS setup, absolutely firewalled completely off the internet. I had to do this, I created a NUC, and I threw in a storage array on it and put all my files on it, and there's a Kali VM on it. So all my dictionaries and public stuff is on there. And then I have to VPN in using MFA and everything to a jump host, connect to that Kali box, which is firewalled off and on a special management network. Then I have access, they put a firewall rule in for me to get up to the AWS instance, again with MFA and everything else. And I had to run everything through that. The passwords never left the box. And like when we moved them off the domain controller, it was a coordinated effort. We encrypted the zip file and the registry hives and everything right on the server, threw it over. And then no password hashes or anything were decrypted until everything was firewalled off and ready to go. So,
excellent question. Someone was asking, can we get a link to the slides afterwards?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and we will be taking this presentation and be putting it up on our YouTube channel. So I'll just add that right now in the chat window. Feel free to subscribe to that so you'll see it when it goes live.
And Dana, I've got a PDF of this one. So
excellent. So there'll be a PDF as well. Blast it out on the Twitters and everything, and we'll get it to you if you need it. Any last minute questions? We still got some time.
Yeah, we can go back over anything or anything anybody wants.
Here's another question from Alan. Would a mining rig work well for cracking also? Not sure if they're optimized for this purpose or not, or does it depend on the scenario?
Ironically, my password rig, when I first was setting it up, I was going to start, this is right before the Ethereum wall got hit. So the plan for it was I was going to sit there and mine Ethereum all day, and then when I needed crack passwords, I would flip it over and then go back. But yeah, these rigs are exactly built for it. You know, if I had to do mine again, I might put it in a better location because my lab does not have quite the AC that I need.
And I'm sure the loudness wouldn't be much better either for that.
Well, it works great in the summer, not so much in the winter. But yeah, it's pretty good. But yeah, a mining rig is exactly perfect. If you're doing that, then you can easily flip back and forth between them. And you don't necessarily need, I mean, I have this big rig because I need the speed. You don't need a big rig to do this. You can force CPU usage. It's obviously going to take a little bit longer. But a lot of laptops, even some of the smaller ones with like the M's and stuff, they work. They're just going to be a little slower and not so much.
I have a Surface Book and I use VMs for everything, and I can never use Hashcat. I have to use John because in the virtualization, I just don't have the right oomph for Hashcat to run well. So it's all about what you have and how you use it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I went off and grabbed another GTX 1080 and threw it into, I have a server thing that's running a bunch of torrents and everything else. And so I threw that in into there just so I could, you know, if I have a little job that I wanted to run while the big jobs are going on, I can just kind of jump over and do that. So anything else?
I'm just checking the Q&A queue. Nothing more in there. The chat looks pretty open. Wow, I guess it gives us a little time to grab a quick bite or a coffee before our next session. Let me just do a quick check here. Yeah, Manny's in our next session.
Excuse to expense a gaming tower. Absolutely. Unfortunately, for some strange reason, when I started getting into passwords, I don't play games as much anymore.
Well, now it should be your VR setup, right?
Yes, actually.
So that's the reality of it all. Is you can say that you're building and you need the compute power and GPUs so you can do VR. Might get that written off that way.
Or I can try and, you know, because my kid's teacher uses Oculus and stuff for Acron, like this big squirrel attack a tree game and stuff. So I can say, hey, look, it's fun time for the summer. But anyways, yeah, if anybody has any questions and stuff, like you've got my Twitter and everything else, hit me up, send me an email, whatever the case may be, and glad to answer any other questions you have.
It was awesome. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate all of your work. That was great research.